In this episode of Cosmic Sponge, we've traveled to the Himalayas in search of the infamous Yeti. The storms picked up a bit, but we did manage to find a Sherpa just outside of base camp. I tell you, we were super lucky we even found him, given there's next to no visibility here. His name's Mayte. Say hi, big guy. I don't speak Sherpa, but I'm pretty sure he said howdy. I also thought Sherpa were short, but Mayte's about 7 feet tall, which turned out to be a really good thing because he ate our goat, which was carrying all our camping gear. Turns out Mayte can carry a ton of stuff too. Other than the god-awful smell coming out of his fur coat, he's been a godsend. I've got a really good feeling about our chances of catching a Yeti on this expedition. Hey, Mayte just found some fresh tracks. Stick around. It's gonna be a good one.
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast. Hey, do you want to go first this time?
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast that talks about UFOs and other weird wonders of the world. Hi, I'm Jimmy Coe.
And this is Stephen Hawk.
And tonight we're going to do stuff, but I'm not going to tell you that. Steve's going to tell you that. Hey, what'd you do this week, man?
Oh,
what have you been up to?
Mostly been, if not working on last week's podcast, editing and that sort of stuff. You know, we've been doing a lot of music stuff because we, as you well know, listeners, we've talked about Jimmy and I are musicians, and we have a jam session / recording session coming up in about 2 weeks in Cleveland. And we have not played together, along with our good friend Dave, the drummer, for about 3 years, thanks to COVID. So it's definitely going to be interesting.
Hey, we should do the show on the road.
I thought about that. You know, I was going to mention that. It's funny you said that. Yeah, we're going to be up there for a few days, and we are going to have to find a time to record, and kind of thought about it. It'd be, you know, maybe fun to bring Dave in.
That's what I'm thinking. You know, let's ask him questions about what he believes and doesn't believe. It could get weird.
That would be very illuminating.
It could be really weird.
Hang in there, listeners. We're going to talk about this later. After the show, we may have to give it a go.
I just got finished slopping the pigs.
Well, you do have chickens.
I do have chickens. I want a pig, but my wife says no pigs allowed.
Why is that?
She thinks they're filthy animals.
Yeah.
Well, they are.
Well, they do live in mud.
And poop.
Yeah.
They eat where they poop.
I don't know what else to say about pigs.
They're supposed to be smart.
They're supposed to be there. By the way, there's a little inside joke here. I told Jimmy, I said, we should chit chat a little bit before we get started with the show. And I said, you can say anything you want. You can tell listeners you slop the hogs. And of course, that's what he said. So.
That's right. Because I'm unoriginal. I was mowing the gravel earlier. I'm gonna have to replace the blades on my mower.
Oh man.
It was I was spacing out. I was listening to another podcast. I was spacing out, and I ran right over the driveway. Big mound of gravel. I could hear it going, man. I was like, oh, well. Know what I'm doing tomorrow. Sharpening
It's
some
the end
blades.
of the season anyway. So.
That's right.
How many more times are you going to mow now?
None.
Right?
I'm done.
Once or twice, maybe.
Done.
Yeah.
I don't care how long it gets. I'm done.
Well, let's get this show started. What do you think?
Why not? You want to go first? You want me to go first?
I wanted to ask you to please tell listeners about the contest. We forgot to mention it last week. Now, we mentioned this 2 weeks ago, that we're going to be holding a contest very soon. Jimmy has all the details.
That's right. Lots of details. I was looking over the items that we're going to include in the contest. I've divided them up into 2 parts. So this is almost like one for us, the Cosmic Sponge guys, and the other for Les Odell's group, which is the WV Cryptids and Strange Encounters, because he contributed some stuff to us for this contest. It's going to include 2 stickers for his Facebook group, which is WV Cryptids and Strange Encounters, and a book that he has. Let me grab it here.
If you remember, listeners, Les Odell was our first guest who came on and talked about his Bigfoot encounters and also talked about a little bit of paranormal investigation. It was a pretty good episode.
He wrote a book called West Virginia Cryptids, A visual field guide for traversing the mountain state. The artist for it is Mark A. Randall. So Les Odell and Mark both signed the book, and we're going to include that. I just hit my mic. But yeah, we're going to have that included in there. 2 stickers from his Facebook group. He also contributed this really cool ornament. I think it's from the West Virginia Bigfoot Museum.
Nice.
Yeah. And then we are going to include...
Oh, by the way, it is a... since this is an audio medium, you may want to describe what it is. This item right here. See, everyone?
For all of you non-psychics out there... all you non-psychic goats, this is a Bigfoot ornament carved out of tree bark.
It looks like a Christmas ornament.
It is, and it's nicely glazed.
Tell you the truth, you could hang it up anytime, all year round. You wouldn't have to just wait for Christmas to hang that ornament.
That's right. It's pretty cool looking, man. It's like a walking Bigfoot.
It's probably about, 6 inches tall, maybe? Something like that. Maybe a little taller. Maybe 8 inches or so.
No, I think it's shorter than that. I mean, just the way I'm holding it to the camera.
It's hard for me to gauge the,
It's like half the size of my face.
Well, how long's your face?
It's longer than it is wide. At least for the next 20 minutes. Probably going to eat some food in a little bit. It's going to make me fat.
All right, man.
And then we're going to have a Cosmic Sponge spiral notebook and a Cosmic Sponge water bottle.
He's holding these items up, so they actually exist.
That's right.
One of the gold lined water bottles.
These are not a figment of my imagination.
Tell listeners how they can enter our contest in order to win those great prizes.
We are going to set up a Facebook page or a Facebook link to our website. And you can go to our website. It's going to be at cosmicsponge.com, and we'll have a contest link at the top and on the homepage that you can click on, and then you'll just enter your email address. And we are not going to use your email address for anything. At least at this point, at some point in the future, we may send you out the option to join a newsletter, but we don't share it with anybody else. It's just one of the requirements for the software we use to do the contest. It has to have some way to contact you guys. So enter an email address, make up a new Gmail if you want to. We don't care. We just want to make sure you are able to get the stuff if you win. We'll have that on our main webpage at cosmicsponge.com. Check out the homepage and check out the menu at the top. We'll have a page dedicated to it, and you'll be able to see all the neat items, look at the photographs and everything. And we'll start that up next week on Sunday. This next Sunday, which is going to be October the 10th, 2021. For those people listening to this way into the future.
So the contest will technically run Sunday, October 10th through October 24th. What you'll want to do is get your entry in during those 2 weeks, and we will then announce the winner on the following show that will come out on Halloween. That's right. On October 31st, we will announce the winner.
Perfect. And
unless we did on our other podcast a couple of years ago, we ran a contest and the person didn't respond. So,
we had to pick a new winner. So
be sure and listen to the podcast, because that's how you are going to find out that you won. Okay.
That's right.
And actually, it's some really cool prizes. I mean, it's probably $50, $60, $70 worth of prizes.
It's $80 worth of prizes.
Wow. $80 worth of prizes.
Technically $82.
Technically. I try not to get too technical on the podcast. But.
That's right. So anyway, we got that going for us.
So please enter that contest, and we will remind you again halfway through, which will be next week. We'll remind you again to enter. But be sure and do that, because I would love to see somebody win this, one of our longtime listeners, one of our true fans. We know we have some out there that we get lots of downloads every week, and we love seeing that. So we hope to be able to return some of the love.
Well, Steve, one caveat. Immediate family cannot enter to win. So tell Mary that she can't enter to win.
I was going to tell my wife to enter 150 times.
I know. So. My wife was like, whoo, I get stuff. I'm like, no, you don't.
Actually, I told my wife if she wants a T-shirt and stuff, she has to buy it through the shop.
That's what I told mine.
So
she's like, have you ever seen Divorce Papers? I said, you'll be getting your T-shirt tomorrow.
Well, I didn't say that. My wife just said, okay. So, yeah, anyway, while you are on there, check out our store. We have new items, man. I'm looking at it right now. We've got the T-shirts. We got coffee mugs. We have 2 different water bottles. One of them has the new graphic with the spaceman instead of the 2 monkeys. We have a spiral bound. We have a spiral.
Have you been
We
drinking,
have a
sir?
spiral bound notebook. One new item that I'm really excited about is the Cosmic Sponge poster. Yeah, I've got all kinds of neat stuff on there now, and we're adding more content all the time. So check out our web store. And also, while you're on our webpage, we have several different links. There's Instagram, there's Facebook, there's YouTube. But also you'll find on there, it looks like a little to-go coffee cup. It's in the upper right-hand corner right next to the cart, your item cart. And that's called Buy Me a Coffee. And you click on there. It's just ways to support us, to help us
grow the show.
Send a little love back our way to help grow the show and, keep the thing going. So we love doing the show, but unfortunately it does cost money for us to do web hosting and all these other things. So anything you could do for us, we really appreciate it. So I think that's all we got. Oh, be sure and rate and review.
Rate and review wherever you listen to us, be it Spotify or Apple or Castro or Google.
I don't even know all the places we are on. How many outlets do we have?
I don't know. It's like 15, something like that.
Yeah.
It's quite a few.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. There's a lot out there. And we're now on Facebook.
Oh.
We just hooked up with Facebook Podcast.
That's the latest one.
Yeah, that's right.
So, yeah, be sure and give us give us some love. Give us 5 stars if you like, and give us a nice review, especially if you like what you hear. If you don't like what you hear, please don't rate the show.
Rate it anyway. I don't care. Rate it what you want to rate it, man.
I say give us 5 stars.
I'd say give us 6.
Okay, enough of that stuff. The business out of the way, but don't forget the contest. I want you to stop what you're doing right now, pull your car over, get your phone out, enter the contest, because we want to give away some of these prizes. So let's move on to the news. Jimmy, what you got for me tonight, man?
What does Einstein and the Roswell crash have in common, my friend?
Well, it feels like a joke, and my knee-jerk reaction is nothing. And then the third one is, I'm sure you're going to tell me something.
Right. So in a 1993 taped confession, never before made public, Albert Einstein's assistant in the summer of 1947 made the stunning admission that she and the professor were flown to Roswell, New Mexico under government direction and examined the debris and bodies resulting from the crash of an extraterrestrial vehicle.
What was her name?
Her name was Dr. Shirley Wright. She held 2 PhDs, one in chemistry and one in physical science.
Now, this is some interview that's emerged that was done in 1993. I'm assuming she's passed away now.
She's passed away. The original interview was in 1993. She did not want her name released. So at the time, she was given a false name in all of the stuff that Leonard Stringfield released. Now, Leonard Stringfield wrote a book, Status Report UFO Crash Retrievals. It's a monograph series that he put out in 1993, and he gave Einstein's assistant the pseudonym Edith Simpson. Just recently, this past week, they've started releasing the tapes where she's talking about this. And she's talking about her going to Roswell with Einstein, of seeing the debris and the bodies from a little bit of a distance, because she said there were a lot of other people around. So she didn't have quite as close a look as Einstein himself did. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting little bit of history. I don't know what more we can read into it other than it's out there now. We know who this person was, who until this point, we didn't know for sure that she was really even somebody who knew Einstein, but she did indeed know Einstein, was his assistant for that summer. So at least those two things line up.
Who was the interviewer?
He was a UFO researcher, Leonard Stringfield, and he published this in early 1990. In 1993 is when he published it. And he arranged 2 meetings in 93 to get together with her and talk about this. This is interesting. You actually get to listen to her talk about it. It's pretty cool.
How much of the interview is there? Do you know?
It looks like it's 18, 19 minutes long. It looks like it might be the whole interview. It's in 2 parts, and we'll post it on our Facebook page so you can have a listen yourself and sort of validate it with your own research. It looks like even though Wright warned of a paper trail to the Roswell trip couldn't be found, attempts were made. The Albert Einstein Archives at Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the Einstein Papers Project at Caltech were both contacted to see if there was any indication of Einstein's whereabouts during the period of July the 7th of 1947, which is the period after the crash. Is there a calendar or schedule by chance that reflects his activities and locations? Although the chances of such documentations were very low, it needed to be addressed. The responses, sometimes after a great delay, were varied. The Albert Einstein Archives offered up a letter from an associate dated around July the 21st, 1947, from an associate that references his offer for Einstein to go on a sailing trip. That reply was that Einstein regrets he couldn't go due to the onset symptoms of an ulcer. The letter writer said that hearing the news was startling. The fact that Einstein suffered an ulcer, perhaps exacerbated by stress after reviewing the Roswell artifacts about 2 weeks prior, may in itself be significant.
I think that's a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
I mean, he could, who knows, man? I mean, an ulcer can be brought on by anything, and it doesn't have to be stress. Ulcers caused by bacteria.
Yeah.
So,
now,
I mean,
the Caltech project, Einstein Paper Project at Caltech, said that Einstein did not leave Princeton in July of that year.
And, conspiracy people would say, of course he didn't, because it was covered up, or he was whisked away to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the middle of the night or something like that. I mean, certainly you could find ways around that. I want to look into that a little more. Listeners, I promise you, and we have been promising to do a Roswell episode. It's such a big story, and I've done a lot of research on it already, but I really, most likely this is going to be a 2-part episode, but this just added another facet to the story. I'm going to have to look into this. This was news to me. Jimmy sprung this one on me, so I'm going to have to dig into that, look at it, try and draw my own conclusions from what we know about it. Anyway, it does sound very, very interesting. Sorry, George.
So what do you got? What's your first news article? Let's hear it.
This is a quote from a man who is an eyewitness to something, and he says this: "I'm 100% sure it was Bigfoot. Man insists he saw mythical creature walking through field near Bristol."
Wait a minute, Bristol, England?
Right, Bristol, right? Hey. I live pretty close to Bristol, right? Like 2.5 miles, about two and a half hours from here.
That's Tennessee.
Right. And that's where you would assume maybe, right?
Right, but you're talking England?
Yeah, this guy said, "I'm 100% sure it was Bigfoot."
Did he say it just like that?
I doubt it.
Or did he say something like, "Oh, I'm pretty sure it was Bigfoot"?
No, man.
So, look, you know what? I know where Bristol is. You know how I know? My best childhood friend, Billy. You know Billy. You killed him in one of our role-playing games in like 2 seconds. You bastard.
More than once.
Yeah. More than once.
I still feel bad about that.
You should.
Be sure and let Billy know that.
I have. Yeah. So anyway, he married a gal from Bristol. I give her grief
Tennessee?
All the time about it. No. England, dummy.
The birthplace of country music.
Bristol is the birthplace of English iron, I guess. I don't know. It's some kind of manufacturing town. I give her grief all the time about it. She's like, "You don't even know where it is." She's not wrong.
This story's dated May 10th, 2018. A train passenger has been left 100% convinced he saw the English version of Bigfoot taking big strides.
Wait a minute. What the heck do you mean when you say the English version? I mean, is it a Bigfoot? Does the Bigfoot talk with an English accent? Let
me just continue the story.
Sorry.
He's 100% convinced he saw the English version of Bigfoot taking big strides through a field near Bristol. In an eerie video, the eyewitness describes what he saw as a huge all-black figure which walked along a hedgerow. The eyewitness said he was on a train from Exeter to Bristol Temple Meads, which was approaching the city on a bright Friday morning in November last year when he saw the massive creature. The report was made to the British Bigfoot Sightings Group. I guess they have so many sightings, they have a group in Britain. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
I didn't either.
I just want to know what a Bigfoot talks like, a British Bigfoot.
A team of researchers who are based around the country who collect and investigate sightings of upright, hairy, ape-like creatures in this country. Again, it's an English newspaper. In my carriage was probably 10 to 12 people, most of them with their head in either mobile phones or the morning newspapers. I haven't been on a train for years, so I was keen to take in the scenery. Anyway, he said that he was, relatively close. He said I would have said it was 70 to 100 meters from the train. My eyes were glued on it at this point.
Did he say how tall he estimated?
No, just said it was big and taking huge strides. I was watching the way the thing was walking almost towards the side of the field. It was edged right up to the hedgerow as if to walk alongside the hedge itself, almost like it was using the hedge for cover? ? To my eye, whatever it was seemed to take massive strides, and it was covering the ground very quickly. As I spun my head to the left to see if anybody else on the train had seen what I was looking at, I was surprised to see that nobody was really looking out from the seats in my direction, or in any direction, other than down, to be fair. The eyewitness's judgment was that the sighting took place about 10 miles before the train arrived at Temple Meads is accurate. It would have put the sighting south of the railway line between Nelsia and Yatin stations. The countryside in this point is low-lying wetland between the M5, which is one of their kind of interstate systems, and the wooded hillscape escarpment that runs up to Bristol Airport. I would imagine 5 to 10 seconds was all I saw it for. He said about 2 minutes later, he saw a couple walking a collie dog in the field, roughly the same distance that I'd seen the black figure. Wonder if they saw the Bigfoot. He says, I'm 100% sure what I saw was the English Bigfoot. And what makes me so confident is the way it walked, with slightly bent legs, long strides, but a graceful, fluid walking motion.
Did it have a top hat and a cane?
No. Well, it didn't say.
It didn't say. Didn't say.
I would assume that if it did, it would have been mentioned in the article.
You know what they call Bigfoots over there? Sir Bigfoot.
This is something interesting, though. One leading British Bigfoot researcher is Deborah Hatswell.
Hatswell?
So what a coincidence.
That I brought up hats?
I think her friend's Caneswell.
You're an idiot.
I'm the idiot asking if it had a top coat and cane.
Well, it's from England, man. They're fancy, You ever see that old TV show, The Avengers?
Long coats.
They have actually they have the bowler hat. I
don't think the sun ever shines. Does the sun ever actually shine in England?
I don't think so.
I mean, they even have a coat company called London Fog. I mean,
That's true.
It's not called London Sun.
Nope. It's London Fog. It's always rainy and miserable here.
All right, let's move on. What's your next story?
Oh, thank God. Let's see.
Yeah.
Let's bring it back to America.
America.
So he is an American engineer. His name is Dr. Salvatore Caesar
You going to spell it?
Paris. Paris?
Just go on, man.
Shut up. His name is Salvatore, and they're considering this guy the next Nikola Tesla. He has a bunch of innovative patents. This article, the reason why I bring it up is it's UFO patents. He came up with this cone-shaped craft that's able to function in the sea and the air and possibly outer space. It works by creating a quantum vacuum with an energy field. It would be undetectable as it wouldn't release heat. They actually gave this guy a patent for this thing. Now, it's interesting to know that Timothy Boulay of NAWCAD stated that his high-energy electromagnetic field generator was tested from 2016 to 2019 at a cost of $500,000. The team working on the project had at least 10 technicians and engineers. They worked over 1,600 hours, and they just couldn't prove that this Paris effect was valid. They're sort of surprised he even got the patent on it. He did, however, work for the Naval Air Warfare Center Aircraft Division in Maryland, and also as an engineer for Northrop Grumman Aerospace Systems. So he's not like a kook. It's not like some guy, who sets off firecrackers and beer cans in his backyard.
It's not like he's hanging out down at Joe's Donut Shop.
He's not hanging out Joe's or in my backyard. He's actually doing stuff.
Yeah, post that story if you would.
Yeah, we'll do.
I would like to read that and follow up on that. Is that all you got tonight?
I've got another one, but it's really quick. It's a short one. It's a fun one, though.
Go for it.
So, Demi Lovato claims she communicates with aliens by singing her 2011 hit Skyscraper. So, this is... This is a Disney kid. She's been in like a bunch of those Disney things. I think she started with Barney, that old Barney dinosaur show, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know, but
my daughter watched that.
I'm not sure that's true, but she was in a bunch of a Peacock series. She's a Disney alum. She's been in a bunch of things. She also did this 2011 hit song Skyscraper, and she just released a Twitter where she. Where she's singing this Skyscraper song, and this little device that's supposed to detect when aliens are close by just fires off like crazy after she starts singing her song. So
I wonder if aliens can stream Spotify on their devices.
Okay, so I'm an old man. I didn't know who this person was. I mean, she's famous for her age in this group and the young folks out there. It's not like Neil Peart came on or Geddy Lee or, somebody from Rush or Queen or, something came on and said, I can sing songs and get UFO people to show up. But, I mean, this is, it's something.
Here, I'm just going to say one thing. When you're a celebrity, there's no such thing as bad publicity.
That's right.
I mean, really. I mean, look at Miley Cyrus, right? I mean, she goes out and acts all crazy just because so people will talk about her and she can break that little kid image, right? Thinking of child singers and child stars.
Yeah, the Hannah Montana girl, right?
Right. This girl, she chose to communicate with aliens with her songs. So,
Hey, you know what? If any singer in the history of mankind could communicate with aliens, it'd be Freddie Mercury. Or maybe David Bowie.
David Bowie.
I think Freddie Mercury was communicating with aliens.
He made a movie called Man from Space or something. What was it? In the 70s?
Yeah, well,
It's about an alien that drops out of from outer space, an alien.
Let's be clear.
Actually, David Bowie probably...
was an alien.
Was an alien.
Yeah, Freddie Mercury was singing with an alien.
Now it makes sense to say that Freddie Mercury would be able to communicate with him.
Exactly.
Kind of makes sense.
That's all I have for news. Carry on, my friend.
I have a story here from the Deacon Herald. It was first published on April 30th, 2019. This headline says, Indian Army finds Yeti footprints during expedition. It has several photographs where they show the giant footprints striding through the snow. Indian Army Mountaineering Expedition team has claimed to have stumbled upon a fresh set of footprints of the mythical creature Yeti in the icy highlands of the Himalayas. The Army on Monday night released 3 pictures of gigantic footprints describing them to be that of a Yetis. A single footprint measures 32 by 15 inches. In the photographs, the footprints are clearly visible. However, prints are of only a single foot. Maybe he was hopping. The Army said its mountaineering team discovered the huge footprints on April 9th in Nepal. This story, along with my other story about the English Bigfoot, are posted to our Facebook page as well as the Cosmic Sponge Theorist Facebook group. Speaking of Yeti, this is going to be a segue into tonight's subject, which is the Yeti.
That's right.
The creature that is said to inhabit the mountainous Himalayas, the highest peaks in the world, the legendary Yeti. And Jimmy, I think you've done some legwork on this one.
Hey,
tell us about the history of the Yeti.
What do Eskimos say when they discovered a Yeti was living amongst them in their village? I knew it. That's right.
Oh,
Some great jokes
so
here tonight
corny.
on the
I knew it.
Yeti front.
Good one, man. Anyway.
And my second Yeti joke, and then I'll stop. How do Yetis tell the time?
I give up.
With a Sasquatch. All right.
Man, those are two awesome dad jokes right in a row.
That's right. That's what I do, man. High in the
It's
Himalayan
all those years in the
What?
all those years being a scout leader.
That's right. High in the Himalayan mountains lurks a beast. Walking upright, he lumbers across the harsh landscape of this distant land. Unless, of course, you live in Nepal. Remains from this beast hidden away in a monastery, in a cave, and other locations point to his real existence. Photos, bones, sightings keep the story of the Yeti alive. From Alexander the Great to Lobsang the Tall. From Jimmy Stewart to Scooby-Doo. The Yeti fills our collective history. Let's go back in time to one of the earliest historical accounts which mentions the Yeti. Alexander the Great, the Yeti Safari. So apparently Alexander the Great is one of the earliest recordings of a Yeti sighting. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
In the Indus River Valley, Anabas Alexandria Book 8 by Arian speaks of a battle with hairy men in a region called Tamaris. The natives were first noticed along the bank of the water, living in stifling cabins. I couldn't figure out what stifling cabins are. Did a little research and looking and digging. I don't know what a stifling, STIFLING, stifling cabin.
Maybe like a stuffy cabin, like the air conditioning's not working.
No air conditioning.
Kind of like your house this past summer.
That's right, no air conditioning, hot as hell. Alexander the Great's heading down here, and this is a book by Arian, who was a Roman, came well after Alexander, so we don't know if it's true or not, if this guy was just making stuff up. But he said they had a battle with these really hairy men. They had nails like beastly claws. They wore skins of animals, and they had a fight with them and killed a bunch of them. Some run off to the hill, some of them they captured. There's also similar writings found in the writings of Claudius Anelius in a book, De Natura Animalium, on the nature of animals, who wrote in the in about 200 BC's era, a Yeti-like creature in the mountains and valleys of India is talked about by, Claudius. So he refers to the creatures as satyrs and describes them as being covered with shaggy hair, and elaborates that when left to themselves, they stay in the forest and eat tree sprouts. Very interesting. However, upon hearing the approach of people, they run with an incredible speed and hide in the mountain caves. I don't know if he went up there looking for him or anything, but if you try to pursue them, however, they repel approaching humans by hurling stones down at them.
That's interesting. Bigfoot's purported to do that as well. There's been several reports of Bigfoot throwing rocks and boulders. Sometimes when people are camping, they'll have stuff thrown into their camps. Interesting. Maybe it is Bigfoot's first cousin on his mother's side.
Hey, did you know that in Russian folklore, they have something like the Yeti called the Chichuna? That's what it is. Said to dwell in Siberia. And it's a Neanderthal-like man that wears pelts, occasionally consumes human flesh.
I found that to be an interesting correlation to the description from Alexander the Great's time. It also said the creatures were wild men, but were also said to wear animal hides. I don't know, maybe a basis of fact there somewhere.
Yeah.
And of course, in those days, 326 BC, we're talking prehistory in the Russian Siberia. There may have been some tribes of men that, were a little different than everyone else. Who knows? Who knows how many tribes or men or Yetis or creatures or what have you that have gone extinct on this planet that we just have no scientific evidence of. May have been a lot more recent history than we think. Or maybe they still exist somewhere in the world. Because the sightings do go on, just like the Indian Army finding those giant footprints in the snow a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so I did find an account in 1899.
Yeah, hit that one, and then we'll talk about kind of moving into the modern era.
Yeah, Lawrence Waddell's among the Himalayas. He reported his guide's description of a large ape-like creature that left prints, which Waddell thought was made by a bear, which will become very important throughout the rest of this podcast. He had heard stories of this bipedal ape-like creatures, but wrote that none of the Tibetans that he'd interrogated on the subject could ever give me an authentic case. On the most superficial investigation, it always resolved into something that somebody heard tell of, no first-hand accounts, at least from his perspective. And then we move into 1925 with Tombazi, a photographer and member of the Royal Geographic Society, saw a creature at 15,000 feet near the Zamu Glacier, and later wrote that he observed the creature from about 200 or 300 yards for about a minute. Unquestionably, the figure in the outline was exactly like a human being, walking upright but stopping occasionally to pull some dwarf rhododendron bushes. He showed up dark against the snow, and as far as I could make out, wore no clothes. Have you ever been that high, 15,000 feet?
No, never.
Let's see, I've been to Pikes Peak this year, and another point in the Rockies, which I remember was 12,000 feet, but Pikes Peak is higher. And let me tell you, you're above the tree line. It's really hard to breathe up there, and there's not very many animals. We did see some goats, some mountain goats.
14,115 feet.
So that's the highest I've ever been, and you know, these guys are seeing or reporting these Yeti sightings at above even 14,000 feet. And this is above the tree line. There's not a lot up there. And let me tell you, when you get up to that level, I mean, I'm from West Virginia. It's not like we're at sea level, but it's nothing like being...
Where I live right now is about 2,500 feet above sea level.
Yeah.
Which I think I'm a little higher up than you are, because you're kind of down in that river valley.
Yeah, I think that's right. Once you're up there, I mean, it's amazing if you're not acclimated to that environment. It is shortness of breath. I mean, I'm in pretty good physical shape for my age. It was pretty hard to get around up there.
Yeah, I know you can suffer altitude sickness.
And I definitely did.
What's it feel like?
Feels like having it's almost like having the flu. It's sort of like that. Shortness of breath. You don't feel very good. You get nauseous, lightheaded. It's hard to move around. Can't concentrate. It's
really just lack of oxygen.
It is. And,
oxygen deprivation, yeah.
And you don't have a lot of animals up at that height, at 14,000 feet. We're talking 17 to 19,000 feet where these incidents are occurring.
There is an earlier example and speculation that this may be related to the Yeti. There was a B.H. Hodgkin in 1932 reportedly encountered a towering non-human covered from head to toe in dark hair, and that fled after being spotted. He dismissed the sighting as an orangutan while writing in the Journal of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. It's not that he thought it was a Yeti or an unusual creature. He thought that it was an orangutan just out of its place. So it's been people later to speculate that that's what he was writing about, thinking that perhaps he mistook the actual Yeti for an orangutan instead of the other way around. Is what is most often the case, I'm sure. Yeah, let's get into the modern era. In 1921, first use of the term abominable snowman is credited to Henry Newman, a contributor to the Indian English language newspaper The Statesman, who reportedly obtained descriptions of the Yeti from accounts of a climber and explorer named Charles Howard Bury, who led the famed 1921 British Mount Everest Reconnaissance expedition. But anyway, Newman, however, is credited with the translation goof that led him to call the creature abominable. Abominable. Oh, my God. I'm glad I'm editing this.
Abominable.
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 How about that? Abominable. I cannot fucking say that. Abominable.
Abominable.
So let's just keep calling it the Yeti. How about that?
Yes, call it.
and as we had said earlier, I didn't know if you heard this part or not, but myths of its origin and stories citing of the Yeti go back several centuries to the pre-Buddhist Eastern civilizations, particularly in the Himalayan mountain region. Some early indigenous people of the Himalayas would reportedly worship this sighted creature, calling it the glacier being. There are several local names for Yetis in Nepalese. Some examples are Yeti, which means in their language Miti, which means man bear. Kangmi means snowman. Migo, wild man. Bun Manchi, jungle man.
So I saw that the name that the Sherpas were calling it at the time that it got its label, the abominable snowman, was Meto Kangmi, which translates literally as the wild man of the snows. And that's what you were talking about earlier, was mistranslation of that by newsman Henry Newman, who translated it metoi as filthy, but thought filthy wasn't catchy enough. So that's when he used the term abominable.
So let's talk about what really set the world on fire with the Yeti, the abominable snowman. And this is when everything changed in 1951 after mountaineer Eric Shipton took an actual photograph of a purported Yeti footprint at the base of Mount Everest. Believe it or not, Sir Edmund Hillary, widely credited to be the first man to climb Mount Everest. Now, it's a little controversy. You want to do a little sidebar here about this?
Sure.
Okay. Sir Edmund Hillary has always been considered the first man to climb Mount Everest, to reach the summit and to return back to tell the tale and have photographic evidence of it. The fact that they put it in here is credited to be the first man. There was also a climber by the name of George Mallory, also British. And this ties in a little bit to that first expedition we just talked about in 1921, the Mount Everest Reconnaissance expedition. So you have to think about, today we hear about people climbing Mount Everest all the time, right? You know, like these groups. It's still quite an achievement. It's still quite a challenge. Many people have died trying to reach the summit. Many people have died reaching the summit and don't make it back because they make the push and get up there and then maybe they wait too long and it gets dark and they freeze to death. So George Mallory was an English mountaineer, and he took part in the first 3 British expeditions to Mount Everest, starting in the 1920s. Him and his climbing partner, Andrew Sandy Irvine, disappeared on the northeast ridge of Everest. The pair was last seen when they were about 800 feet from the summit. Mallory's ultimate fate was unknown for 75 years until his body was discovered on May 1st, 1999. By an expedition that had set out to search for the climber's remains. Whether Mallory and Irvine reached the summit before they died remains a subject of debate. So that's the reason that said purported to be. So ever since they discovered him so close to the summit, many, if not most mountain climbers said they probably pushed to reach the summit and then
died on the way
perished on their way down. And that would have been in the 1920s and 1924, almost 30 years before Hillary reached the summit. But just a personal aside here, regardless of that, I don't think there'll ever be there's no way, there's no photographs or anything unless we invent a time machine. There's nothing that will prove George Mallory was the first one to reach the summit of Mount Everest. But I think if you're a mountain climber, you know, it's sort of like, I'm the first one to get there, and I'm the first one to make it back alive to tell everyone about it and show you my picture. Okay, that he should always, to me, Edmund Hillary should be the man who conquered Mount Everest. I mean, maybe George Mallory reached the top, but I mean, I just don't think they should be credited for it. I mean, that just shouldn't be. I mean, I guess it's interesting to talk about, and certainly they were brave, and Harry's trying to do something really unusual and difficult, one of the most difficult tasks you could ask a man to do in those days, or any man to do nowadays even. I think you should have to live to tell the tale unless you have some kind of real proof that you were there.
Come on. I mean, if you're that close, it's not like you sat there and you said, let's stop for some lunch, before we make it to the top.
Usually the big problem when people climb Mount Everest is on the return. That's when most people die because they always push for the top. The weather might be coming in. It may be getting ready to get dark. And I mean, it's cold enough. And as you mentioned earlier, this is almost 30,000 feet, twice as high as you were when you were having trouble breathing. So you can imagine. I mean, that's one reason they go to these base camps at 15,000 feet and stay for a few weeks to try and get acclimated to surviving without oxygen. It's bitter, bitter cold up there. If they're 800 feet from the summit, they probably pushed for it and died on their way back. But again, I think Hillary should be given credit for it. So, and he was. We still don't know. They may have perished on their way up. We just don't know.
Yeah. We're just going to have to live with not knowing.
But anyway.
You know what? I think for modern Westerners, it's the Eric Shipton photograph from the 1951 expedition that probably puts the Yeti on the map.
It absolutely did. Even though there were some photographs taken earlier, but they weren't published, became widely known when they were published by Popular Science in 1952. I'm trying to find where that's at. Here it is. In 1937, Frank S. Smith photographed alleged Yeti footprints, and they were printed in Popular Science in 1952. So Western interest in the Yeti peaked dramatically in the 1950s. While attempting to scale Mount Everest in 1951, Eric Shipton took photographs of a number of large prints in the snow about 20,000 feet above sea level. These photos have been the subject of intense scrutiny and debate. Some argue they are the best evidence of the Yeti's existence, while others contend the prints are those of a mundane creature that have been distorted by the melting snow. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, I looked into that a little bit because 20,000 feet above sea level was not actually where they took those photographs. It was between 16 and 17,000 feet. They came across a whole series of footprints in the snow on the lower part of the glacier. There seemed to be two groups of them, one rather indistinct in outline, leading to the surrounding snowfields, but the others were more distinct, and they each imprint etched into the 2 to 4 inch snow covering showed that whatever it was pretty heavy. They had no means of measuring, so what they did, Shipton took out his ice pick axe, his little ice axe, and he laid it down next to it so that he would have a way to reference the size of the footprint. And it's pretty large, and it's one of the most famous photographs of the Yeti ever, as far as evidence goes. And it looks pretty large. I mean, it's much wider than a man's footprint, but not too much longer than a man's footprint. It does have like this toe heading out the side. Shipton said that the footprint was about the same length as his boot, and he takes a size 42 continental or 8.5 British, which is about 12 to 13 inches long. So, I mean, within the realm of really big-footed people, I guess. Big-footed people. See what I did there?
If you look at the photograph, and this is a very famous photograph, he lays the head of his ice axe right next to this footprint. It doesn't look overly large, and you're right. It's probably, my guess is about 12 inches. But what's weird is the shape of the footprint, I think, because it looks like one big toe. Then it looks like the toe beside her, the middle toe, is much longer and kind of bent to the left, and then it looks like 3 little toes, much smaller, but there's a huge space between the big toe and the middle toe and the rest of the toes, and all of those seem to be kind of pointing to the right, like they're kind of pointing toward each other, that middle toe and all the other toes. And it's just an odd looking footprint. It doesn't look like, an average animal, like a bear track, let's say, or anything like that. And I think that's what they found so unusual about it. It wasn't necessarily the size. I mean, we're not talking about Bigfoot here. We're talking about the Yeti. Even though a lot of people want to correlate Yeti with Bigfoot and say, hey, these are practically the same creature, related. Nobody knew about Bigfoot in 1951, but they had heard legends in the Himalayas about the Yeti and about some large creature that existed here. But this, you're right, this took it to another level. Whenever these photographs hit the Western press, all of a sudden that's the abominable snowman off to the races with this legend.
I think it's important to point out here who we're talking about who's bringing this information back to the masses. We're talking hardy men who had really good reputations and had no reason whatsoever to hoax or exaggerate. And matter of fact, they didn't make a claim that this was some Yeti or upright beast or anything like that. If anything, they downplayed it. They just said it was very unusual to find these types of footprints that didn't match any of the animals that they'd seen in the area, to the best of their knowledge, at 17,000.
They were not out to try and find a Yeti or some strange creature. They were out to climb Mount Everest, and that's what they wanted to be known for.
Exactly.
They just found it unusual and said, hey, look at this strange photograph. Let's take a picture of it next to the pickaxe. Now, let's continue scouting the face of Everest to see if we can figure out a way to get to the summit, because they have 2 years before they summited Mount Everest whenever these photographs were taken.
Exactly. And in that group, it was Eric Shipton, William Murray was in that group. We had Edmund Hillary before he was Sir Edmund Hillary was in that group.
Right.
We had some serious men who weren't there to screw around. They were there to make it to the top.
He was not knighted because he found a Yeti track. He was not knighted because he was the first man to climb Mount Everest.
Right.
That's what they were after. Not ones to make flights of fancy.
Right. So, I mean, this was taken very seriously by many people, and then it was exaggerated by the media. And that's where we started getting into some of our Yeti stories.
And then after this came out, Peter Byrne reported finding a Yeti footprint in 1948 in northern India near the Zemu Glacier. In 1954, the Daily Mail, a newspaper in England, hired mountaineering legend John Angelo Jackson, who made the first trek from Everest into the wilderness, and in the course of which he photographed symbolic paintings of the Yeti in different temples, different Tibetan temples. Jackson tracked and photographed many footprints in the snow. Considered most are identifiable now, but there were many large footprints which could not be identified. These flattened, foot-like indentations were attributed to erosion and subsequent widening of the original footprint by wind and particles. So that's one argument that, you know, the poo-pooers and the skeptics say, is that, hey, this is really just a bear track, or this is really just a wolf track, and the snow's melted it and made it expand. We've all seen that. Well, at least those of us that have walked around in the snow and lived places where it snows. Yeah, when the sun melts it, it makes the footprints go out. But he also discovered in a monastery a scalp of a Yeti. And so that's something we started seeing. They started discovering, once they started looking for the Yeti, and the newspapers and people wanted to go out and actually find these creatures instead of just, hey, let's climb Mount Everest. They started finding in all these temples and places around Tibet and in the Himalayas, way up in the mountains, they started finding, like, allegedly bones. There was a hand of a Yeti. There was this scalp of a Yeti that's still around. You know, different things that they've collected and kept in these monasteries of the Yeti and have been there for a long time.
I think probably the most important one is the Peng Boce monastery. The claim from the members of that monastery was that a monk once walked into a cave to meditate where he saw a Yeti. And then many years later, that monk came back to the same cave and found that the Yeti was dead. And he collected the hand and the scalp and took it back to the monastery, where it remained until being discovered by a explorer by the name of Byrne. Now, this gets really interesting. You can't make this stuff up. If you had somebody that you wanted to fund an expedition for something like Yeti exploration kind of thing to find a Yeti, a Texas oil man by the name of Tom Slick, I'm not making this up, folks, funds an expedition, several, in fact.
Wow.
Which includes...
That's just one of life's little ironies.
Right? So he
could have legally changed his name, though.
He could have.
Tom Slick, oil man.
So in 59, he hires this guy, Peter Byrne, and puts together this expedition that goes into the Himalayas. And it's one of several that he funds in an attempt to find proof of the Yeti. And when he does this, Peter Byrne, the guy who's heading this expedition, locates this monastery that claims to have two artifacts that are proof positive of the Yeti. One is a scalp bone and one is a hand bone. Now, Byrne reportedly steals some of the pieces of the hand and replaces it with bones from a human hand. Now, where he got those, who knows? But he takes these artifacts back to London to have them examined. And it's really interesting that Jimmy Stewart, the famous actor, enters our story because in order to get the hand out of Nepal and into London, he has Jimmy Stewart's wife smuggle it by putting it in her unmentionables so they don't find it when they're looking through the luggage and stuff. I didn't know they had TSA back then, but apparently they did. I was looking for
James. Yeah, it's almost hard to believe. The actor Jimmy Stewart. You know, maybe some of you younger listeners don't know who he is, but he was one of the most prolific actors in the 40s and 50s and 60s. I mean, he was in many
It's
movies.
a Wonderful Life, right? That's probably his most famous
Everyone's
one.
seen that one if you've watched any Christmas movies.
Right, A Rear Window, Vertigo.
Yeah, he was in a bunch of Alfred Hitchcock movies, but I mean, Westerns, I mean, you name it. He's sort of
Who
like
Shot
the
Liberty
Gene Hackman.
Valance? You know, he's
sort of like the Gene Hackman of our era.
That's right.
You know, the previous era, been in so many movies. But that is a very strange story. Yeah, apparently he was visiting India, smuggled it out in his wife's luggage. Yeah, I found that to be kind of a crappy thing to do, personally. I mean, steal from these people that have nothing as it is and steal something that they think is sacred or even unusual. Slick, one of his expeditions, also purportedly recovered some Yeti feces. Supposedly, the fecal analysis found a parasite in the feces that could not be classified. This is interestingly enough, there was so many expeditions going there. The United States government actually created 3 rules. There's how much interest was, and the U.S. government maybe even thought there was a chance that the Yeti could be found. They created 3 rules for anyone visiting Nepal to get a permit. The 3 rules were obtain a Nepalese permit, do not harm the Yeti except in self-defense, and let the Nepalese government approve any news reporting on the animal's discovery. Those were the 3 rules. Now, if you were out looking for the Yeti, I feel like Rule 3 would be broken.
Yeah. You think?
Oh, let me throw one more sighting here. There was a book published called The Long Walk by, and I have no idea who this individual is, Sławomir Rawicz. And he was a Polish army lieutenant, had sort of an interesting life, imprisoned by the Soviets. And on The Long Walk, he claimed that in 1941, he and 6 others had escaped from a Siberian gulag camp and began a long journey south, supposedly traveling through the Gobi Desert, Tibet, and the Himalayas before finally reaching British India in the winter of 1942. In the book, he claimed that in the winter of 1940, their path was blocked for hours by 2 bipedal animals that were doing seemingly nothing but shuffling around in the snow. That's all the description we really get. So I wanted to throw that one out there before we move on to the 1960s. So,
well, this is more about the hand. So the hand and the skull. They took it to London University, where primatologist William Charles Osmond Hill conducted a physical examination of the pieces that Byrne supplied. His first findings were that it was hominid in nature. And in 1960, he decided that the fragments were closer match with a Neanderthal.
Now who can't talk?
So anyway, in 1991, in conjunction with Coleman's research, it was discovered that the Slick expedition, George Apigino, had retained samples of the alleged Yeti hand. And in a NBC program of Unsolved Mysteries, they obtained those samples and determined they were similar to human tissue but were not human, and could only verify they were near human. And after that broadcast, you know what happened? the entire hand was stolen from the monastery. So they just had fragments from that original hand. The entire hand after that was stolen and reportedly disappeared into a private collection via the illegal underground in the Cell of Antiquities. Yeah, did you ever see the Lord of the Rings movies?
Yeah.
So the Lord of the Rings movies had a special effects shop called Weta Workshops. They actually produced a replica of the skull and hand based on photographs and supplied them to the monastery.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, free of charge. Didn't charge them anything. There you go.
In the 1950s, here's a pretty cool thing. The Nepali government cashed in on the increasingly popular Yeti myth by issuing Yeti hunting licenses priced at £400 per Yeti. Sakting Wildlife Sanctuary in Bhutan is a national park officially dedicated to preserving the Yeti.
You remember The Wild Kingdom by Mutual of Omaha?
Sure.
Marlon Perkins?
Marlon was always in the Jeep with the binoculars when Jim, the young guy, was always in the swamp, like
wrestling
the snakes and stuff.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, the anacondas was wrapping around him. Jim, meanwhile, was trying to take a scale sample.
So him and Sir Edmund Hillary took a side trip to Nepal to investigate that hand from the monastery.
Marlon Perkins?
Yeah. Hillary looked at it and saw the bones that Byrne had supplanted in there and determined that it was just a hoax, having no knowledge that Byrne had actually done that at the time.
The first scientist to investigate the Yeti was a German professor, Ernst Schaefer. Allegedly, he was employed by the head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, to search for the Yeti in 1938 in the hope that it would turn out to be the progenitor of the Aryan race. Schaefer reached the conclusion that the Yeti was in fact the Tibetan bear. The Yeti is big business in Nepal. Visitors can stay at the luxurious Yak and Yeti Hotel in Kathmandu and even travel with Yeti Airlines.
No way.
And we have Yeti coolers.
We do. Do you have a Yeti cooler?
I don't. I got a couple of those cups. What else do you have? Any other cases you want to talk about on that? Because I do have one little sciencey thing I want to talk about.
I don't have anything else there. We're going to start getting into the skeptic stuff.
I mean, again, we've already talked about the footprints, the snow, being able to expand them whenever the sun hits the snow, kind of melts it out a little bit, then it can refreeze. You know, we've all experienced that. Those of us who walked around in snow or grew up where it snows, you know exactly what that's about. The one thing I wanted to talk about now this is an article from Science Magazine. This was published on November 28th, 2017. Science had already discovered that after some genetic analysis of a couple of the hair samples collected in India and Bhutan suggested that one small stretch of their mitochondrial DNA, and in case you guys are wondering, that's the genetic material in a cell, and it's sort of the power generating machinery that's passed down only by females. Now, we've talked about that before on History of Ancient Civilizations. And it doesn't even have to be the species. It can actually go back to previous species that they've evolved from. And anyway, so this genetic material that had been examined before sort of pointed to that of polar bears. It resembled polar bears. So there is an evolutionary biologist. Her name is Charlotte Lindquist from the State University of New York in Buffalo. She and her colleagues took a very thorough look at the mitochondrial DNA of as many samples of supposed Yeti remains as she could get her hands on. Some were obtained when she worked with a UK production crew in the 2016 documentary Yeti or Not, which sought to sift fact from folklore. The filmmakers got a hold of a tooth, some hair collected on the Tibetan plateau in the late 1930s, as well as a sample of scat from Italian mountaineer Reinhold Messner. More recent samples included hair collected in Nepal by a nomadic herdsman, a leg bone found by a spiritual healer in a cave in Tibet. The team also analyzed samples recently collected from several subspecies of bears native to the area, including the Himalayan brown bear, the Tibetan brown bear, and the black bear. Altogether, the scientists analyzed 24 samples, including 9 purported to be from the Yeti. Of the 9 Yeti samples, 8 turned out to be from bears. One of them, I think, was a dog. But the work was good because they learned a lot more about the type of bear species that inhabit the Himalayas.
Yeah, so
Himalayan mountain regions.
So what you're saying is the
Nepal.
Yeti is descended from bears.
Okay.
So yeah, that's true. They actually believe it's the Himalayan brown bear, right?
Right.
Maybe even the Tibetan bear.
You know, it's a rare subspecies of more common brown bears. Brown bears, of course, exist all in Russia, Siberia, but it is and genetically they did turn out, almost 8 samples turned out to be this rare species of Himalayan brown bear. So it's rare in that area anyway, as rare as perhaps what we presume a Yeti would be.
So there's a really good book written about this. It's by Daniel C. Taylor. He's actually a West Virginian, lives here. It's a pretty famous book. He's set up sanctuaries for these brown bears, and he wrote a book called Yeti, the Ecology of a Mystery, where his conclusions pretty much point to these bears being misidentified as Yeti, their life in the Himalayas, and how they become more endangered given the encroachment of humans. As more and more expeditions go on in the area and human population grows, it's impacting these bears. He set up a sanctuary and written a history about how the Yeti and the bears intermingle throughout the life of the bears and the mythology that builds up around the Yeti.
And I know there have been some witnesses that have heard these results that have said it wasn't a bear, the same as Bigfoot. People in the western states in particular, in this country, will often say, I've seen bears in the wild. Oh, I forgot to tell you, my neighbor saw a bear coming out of my woods.
Was it a bear or was it a Bigfoot?
Oh, well. Yeah, anyway.
It was Wilt Chamberlain's ghost.
That's the second bear sighting I've had down here. That was just last week. Anyway, I mean, I think a lot of things point toward that. I think if we would have gotten, good samples probably from that scalp and some other things, probably would have turned out to be a bear. Maybe not.
Well, what about the hand? The hand comes back as hominoid, close to Neanderthal. What do you say?
I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe they just found a Neanderthal that died in a cave that was also inhabited by a Yeti that was really just a bear.
That is a good point. Now, in that, did they determine how old it was?
I
would be interested to know how old the hand was or if it was dated. Because in those mountains, in those icy Himalayan mountains, I mean, it wouldn't be unheard of to find a well-preserved Neanderthal hand.
It's happened in other mountain ranges.
It has. In Europe, the Iceman was found, and he was 9,000 years old.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
I think that's likely. Who knows? The legend will continue.
The legend will continue.
I'm certain that just like the Indian Army a couple of years ago, finding some footprints, believing them to be Yeti footprints. Oh, and I was going to say, I ran across it during my research, and I failed to bookmark that area. But I did read that later, one of Shipton's, of course, that's the one footprint that got everything started about the Yeti. But I did read later on, another photograph was published, or at least viewed by someone, perhaps in the National Geographic Society or something like that. And it said in the other photograph, you could clearly see claw marks. Now, I haven't seen that photograph myself, but it's almost as if they chose to publish the one that looked like a Yeti as opposed to the one that maybe was a bear.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah, I remember reading that as well. So who knows?
Yeah, I don't really have anything else on the Yeti. What about you?
I saw the Yeti on Scooby-Doo when I was a kid, and
you did mention Scooby-Doo in
that's
your
right.
intro.
And I have to say that he's part of our popular culture now.
The same as Bigfoot.
Like Bigfoot, I don't believe that the Yeti exists, but I'll keep an open mind. I mean, if you show me some good evidence, but I haven't seen any. It's interesting, though, that some people refer to them as wild men, particularly the Sherpas, who...
Been lots of legends of wild men all over the world.
Right. And a lot of people think Bigfoot, the Yowie in Australia, Japan has their own version.
The English Bigfoot? The European Bigfoot?
The European Bigfoot with the bowler cap and the cane. And they're all over the place, man. So there may be something to them. I don't know. But I just haven't seen any evidence that convinces me.
I think, just, speculating here, 100% speculating, of course, I think there's decent evidence for Bigfoot. I think the tracks themselves, I think there's been a couple of really good videos. I know the jury, in a way, is still out on the Patterson film, and we talked about that at length on our Bigfoot episode. Maybe a hoax, but if they did, it's a really, really good one, man, And then that other one, the one where the guy was in, what was it? We talked about it in that same episode. That one video where he saw two, and it searched and searched and searched for Bigfoot, and ends up seeing 2 big feet, I guess. I don't know.
2 Bigfoots.
I haven't decided yet. Bigfoots. That's what Les likes.
That's what I like.
I don't know, man. I think most likely most sightings are going to be, black bears or brown bears for sure. But at the same time, there's so much good evidence on the footprints and so many really compelling casts that have been made of them, the dermal ridges. And I don't know, man. I'm 50-50 on Bigfoot. I really am.
I got to see some DNA samples that,
All right. And I get that. And I get that. But we talked about that at length, and listeners, if you want to go back and listen to our Bigfoot episode, we talked quite a bit about it. But for some reason though, on the Yeti, I think a lot of it for me is just the same as you had mentioned before. 20,000 feet, there's nothing to eat up there, and it's a large creature. I mean, certainly a creature might take a shortcut over the mountain, but that could not be its habitat. There's just not enough food, or not enough calories to take in to support a creature that large. So usually when you see animals moseying around at 15 or 20,000 feet, they're on their way somewhere else to get some food, and they're taking a shortcut. Instead of going around the mountain, they're going over it. So, maybe it is this bear. Maybe it's a Yeti. Who knows?
Hey, after a few drinks, a priest asked Bigfoot, "So are you drunk yet?" The Bigfoot replies, "Nope, not Yeti."
Oh my God, dude. Oh man.
Well,
Well, you're full of these Yeti jokes tonight.
The things I do.
All right. Well, I think we are going to wrap this one up here. I hope you enjoyed everything on the Yeti. We were a little all over the place tonight, but maybe you learned a few things, and not nearly as many sightings or stories to talk about like we have with Bigfoot. Much, much more commonly seen creature than the Yeti, just how remote that the Himalayan mountains are. I think it's difficult to, and who knows, maybe a lot of Sherpas see them and just obviously don't get reported in the West. So
yeah, fewer people at 17,000 plus feet.
A lot fewer. We're going to wrap it up here. Please remember to rate and review wherever you listen to the podcast. It helps other people find the show. If you would like to reach out to us, you can at firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Do not forget that we have a contest going. It is starting today. And as you hear this, unless you're listening way in the future, go to cosmicsponge.com and look for the contest page. It'll be right there on the front page. Look for the link. It'll take you to the contest. All you have to do is enter an email address. That is it. Also, check us out on Facebook. Most of the stories that you heard tonight, plus a lot more, news stories about UFOs, cryptids, they're all posted on Facebook, including many of the stories we talked about tonight. And finally, check out Instagram. Jimmy gets on there and makes funny Instagrams almost every day. So he usually works on them and releases a whole batch of them at one time. So
yeah,
I'll get caught up on them every now and then, and they are pretty good, pretty funny. That is it. Jimmy, you got anything else for tonight? Anything you want to add?
Nope, I don't think so. I think we have a lot of stuff going on in the background that we're trying to build up and work towards a better show, a bigger show, but nothing we need to talk about quite yet.
And don't forget the web store, also on cosmicsponge.com, and the Buy Me a Coffee. If you'd like to support the show, just click on that little to-go coffee cup in the upper right-hand corner of the web page, and that way you can help us out. And anything you do, we would really appreciate it, because we're going to use those funds to grow the show. That's what it's all about.
Exactly.
So with all that out of the way, this is Stephen Hawk signing out, and we'll see you next week.
Jimmy Coe. The eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, ditto, and we'll catch you next week.
Be sure and wear your boots. It gets cold at 20,000 feet.
It does indeed.
And before we go,
what
we're going to be talking about next week. Next week, this show will come out on guess what day?
Monday, Tuesday, Sunday. And it comes out on a Sunday.
Do you know what Sunday is? It's Halloween. So we are going to be doing a very special episode. Our Halloween episode is going to feature ghosts and hauntings.
Sweet.
So be sure and tune in.
Yeah, you got one in mind. I got one in mind. And with that, we're done.
Yeah, really done this time. I mean, really done. Like, we're going to turn it off because we're done.
That's well, I'm not going to turn it off. I'm going to keep it rolling.
Yeah, of course you will.
Yeah, well. That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.